Genshin team building is made up of something called cores, which is a group of units that synergize well together, a notable example being the national core built up of Bennett, Zhangling, and Jingzhou. The reason they are called the core is they essentially enable a certain type of team to work. Going back to the national example, you want to enhance Zhangling's damage, and adding in Jingzhou for constant Hydra to vaporize and Bennett to further buff Zhangling happens to be one of the best ways to do that. And from the idea of enhancing Zhangling's damage, you can slot in a multitude of characters here. Cores come in either duos or trios, and in this video I'll be telling you about the duos you should be building your account around to make the Abyss and combat events more of a joke. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be rating the top 5 duo team cores in Genshin, primarily focusing on their strength and flexibility. This is my opinion, so don't take it to heart, blah blah blah, we all know the drill. If you disagree, leave an angry comment calling me stupid. However, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and I'll try to keep you updated. Kicking things off at number 5. Wait, should I order this? I actually didn't think, you know what, fuck it, it's ordered. We have Nilou and Nahida. The idea behind this team core is to generate blooms. Nilou teams want you to generate as many blooms as possible, and Nahida having the strongest and longest lasting Dendro application in a massive radius is obviously going to be your ideal pairing. In terms of strength, Nilou bloom teams are absolutely up there, as well as being arguably the strongest AoE teams at most levels of investment. And in terms of flexibility, as long as the other two characters apply Dendro or Hydro, they make the team work well. Nilou, Nilou Bloom, Super Bloom makes not very desired characters like Candice and Cole viable, so it also lightens the burdens for the other half of your Abyss. The only caveats to Nilou Bloom teams are single target and shield breaking. You generate more blooms in AoE, so when you are facing enemies in single target, the damage of Nilou teams do fall off quite a lot. So for boss chambers, the team won't feel as strong. This tends to not be a massive issue though, as it's not like the team does no single target damage. You still get blooms and Nahida's talent damage, as well as the fact that if you are really struggling, you can slot in a decently invested Yelan or Jingzhou and they can help you clear these boss checks. But it's definitely something to know overall. And for shield breaking, Cryo and Geo shields aren't that common, right? Overall, Nilou Bloom teams are definitely up there in both strength and flexibility, with only some limiting factors that prevent me from putting it higher. At number 4 we have Nahida again, but this time instead of being paired with an ugly basic bitch, she's paired with the Beanstalk? Yeah, I can't think of a name. Alhaitham and Nahida, despite being another Dendro core, focuses more on talent damage. From this core, it is quite flexible, as you can either go with spread teams composed of most commonly 2 Electro units, or you can go with quick bloom teams that alongside Nahida and Alhaitham's damage, you also get to trigger hyper blooms. And instead of explaining quick bloom myself, as I was recording this, one of my good friends Noir posted a quick bloom explanation video, so make sure to check it out and tell him I sent you. Spread teams most often than not will use Kuki as a healer, so you have a form of mitigation on the team, and then an off-field electro damage dealer, whether that's Fischl, who's able to hold Elegy, Beta, who spikes this team's damage massively in 2 target scenarios, or Yai, who can add her front-loaded burst damage to help clear waves, and always has her turrets to help with sustained damage. And then for quick bloom teams, take a pick at any of the 3 Hydro women at your disposal. Jingzhou is great if you need the extra survivability or your Alhaitham isn't as heavily invested, as Jingzhou allows you to generate more blooms for your hyper bloom trigger. Yelan if you don't need the survivability and care more about the damage, and lastly Furina if you want even more damage than using Yelan at the cost of some blooms and survivability, but making your Alhaitham do more damage, as a quicken aura uptime is longer the slower your Hydra application is. And then for your electro triggers, you have a choice between Raiden and Kuki, and let me make this very easy for you. Are you using Jingzhou? Okay, then use Raiden for more damage as she generates more blooms. If you aren't using Jingzhou, just use Kuki. Alhaitham Nahida is extremely powerful. Quick bloom teams are some of the best at clearing single target checks, as you take the best parts about hyper bloom while adding more flexible rotations and potent talent damage to the team. The only things really keeping me from putting it higher is that being a team core consisting of a carry, you do lose quite a bit of flexibility from not being able to slot in an on-field damage dealer. And also for being a carry core, the next one is just stronger, being Neuvillette and Furina. These two kind of just fuck things up. I don't think I need to rag on about how strong Neuvillette is on top of how easy he is to use and how flexible his rotations are. And now you add on Furina to his team, who also does amazing damage by herself, while giving Neuvillette an extremely strong and long-lasting buff. The reason why they work so well together is because of some issues with Neuvillette. He didn't really have that many synergistic teammates pre-Furina, and was more or less just slapping random shit together in different Hydra team archetypes. With his damage being so potent at a base that didn't matter, Neuvillette was so homeless with no 9 to 5 that people were using Child for his A1 talent. And then people also complained about Furina needing a healer for her teams to get a lot of fanfare, while introduced Neuvillette, who's very easily able to max out Furina's fanfare count even without a healer on his teams. The only thing you lose by using them together is Neuvillette / Draconic stack, but Furina's buffing and own personal damage is more than enough to make up for it, giving Neuvillette his strongest teams, while also being extremely flexible in teammate diversity. If you need mitigation, slap on Zhongli or Baizu, extra buffing and crowd control, Venti or Kazuha, want to use Hyper Bloom, Nahida or Raiden, want to play forward vape, Hei, Nahida and Zhangling, Taser, Fischl or Kuki. With all of these teams having a boatload of AoE and single target damage, and because of all these factors, it rightfully deserves its place on this list. While I have you here, actually let me just talk about a competition I'm holding. In my Discord server, which is in the description below, I'm hosting a competition to see who has the best Tutao, and if you manage to have one of the 3 best Tutaos in the server, you can win some prizes, which I'll put up on screen. The deadline is the 28th of January, so if you're slacking on your Tutao, you have 2 weeks, and further details will be in my Discord server, so make sure to join. For the number 2 spot, we have Bennett and Kazuha. So let's think about this. If you get any Pyro, Electro, Hydra, or Cryo damage dealer that also scales with attack, and add one more synergistic unit, you get one of, if not their best teams. If you look at Pyro damage dealers, we get the VV Vape Core, which is still very strong, and you also get things like Mono Pyro Klee or Linny teams also being able to run forward Vape Furina with them. If you look at Cryo units, congratulations, we get Reverse Melt teams. Riosli and Gonyu take advantage of these teams as well as some 4-star carries. For Electro units, you basically just have Hyper Raiden and Hyper Beidou teams. And for Hydra units, well, you get Alhaitham. And what also makes these two so strong is that you're able to use Kazuha as a Pyro enabler. Bennett will shoot his Pyro load into your characters constantly, and Kazuha is able to take his load and spread it across a wide area, filling enemies up with his warm aura until they can't take it anymore. This gives you a very consistent way to enable pyro reactions like Overload, Procs, and Raiden Hyper that make up a decent amount of damage, also leading into giving you quite accessible double sword setups. And the last part about what makes this duo shine is the buffing profile, with Bennett giving you all the attack you could ever need, while Kazuha freely amps up your damage on the damage bonus side. And since these two buffs don't overlap, the opportunity cost of running them together with attack scalers is a no-brainer. All in all, a very powerful duo, and despite being a 4-star, you only really want Bennett C1, which is quite reasonable. Now, before getting to the number 1 placement, I first want to go over some honorable mentions and why they didn't make the list. The first I want to mention is Moosh and Farazan. Even before Furina, characters like Mika and Yunjin were made relevant due to being able to use really well with Wanderer. And after Furina, Mika and Charlotte teams could be built even foregoing Bennett. But just like how I abandoned Scar and Moosh, I had to ditch Wanderer from this list just because comparing this to other carry cores on the list, like New Furina or Alhaitham Nahida, I don't think Wanderer Farazan shapes up to be as comparable to the two. The next honorable mention is Bennett and Zhangling. Again, this duo is extremely strong and flexible, mostly being predicated off of Zhangling's amazing damage in national teams, while also being able to enable things like Reverse Mill or just be an additional source of damage, on top of carries like in Mono Pyro teams or for some Geo teams. If you asked me a year or two ago, I would have put this on the list without a doubt, but as time has gone on, this duo nearly isn't as prevalent as the number 2 placement, which is just replacing Zhangling with Kazuha, as more characters have caught up and even exceed the level of national teams, while having other extremely strong off-field damage dealers. Now we have my saddest honorable mention, and one I really wanted to put on the list, Fischl and Dendro. The idea was pretty much how Fischl is used in every aspect of Dendro teams beside Nilou Bloom, Aggravate practically revolving around Fischl, Burgeon teams using Fischl for more single target damage, and help better siege generation, Burning teams doubling down to take advantage of Overload and quicken damage, and on Hyper Bloom teams, Fischl doesn't steal blooms often enough from your Electro trigger, giving you Hyper Bloom on top of Fischl's damage, so much so that it even outdoes the standard double Hydra Hyper Bloom teams. Fischl is amazing in Dendro, but for the sake of talking about specific units, Dendro isn't really a character, so it doesn't feel right to include. The last honorable mention I want to talk about is probably an oddball to some, but let me cook. And that is the Raiden and Yelan duo. This synergy is pretty easy to break down. Electro and Hydra are great elements, especially when paired together. On carry Raiden teams, either with Bennett, Kazuha, or Furina Jean, Raiden lowers Yelan's energy requirements and increases her burst damage, skyrocketing Yelan's contribution on these teams, and allowing her to run a more offensive weapon. For a crit Raiden, you have multiple teams you can play with. Even Rational is generally better with Yelan or Xingqiu, and EC ensures you don't miss vapes. And then flipping, get it? Flipping things over to EM Raiden, you then have Raiden Hyper Bloom teams, which are also extremely strong for the investment Raiden needs of these teams. Overall, quite a strong core. It didn't make the list just because, again, the others on this list are just better by virtue of being just as flexible while also enabling higher power. And now let's move on to our number 1 spot on this list, which is, to probably no one's surprise, Yelan and Furina. Double Hydra was a team core built up of Xingqiu and Yelan during Yelan's initial release. The aim of this team wasn't to have more Hydra application, as Xingqiu is perfectly capable of supplying all the Hydra your teams need, but just due to the fact that these two complement each other well. Yelan and Xingqiu both have pretty steep energy needs, meaning they normally run an ER weapon, but with Double Hydra, this would effectively lower both of their energy needs, making the team easier to pilot and allowing them to do more damage, as the energy needs can go towards more offensive substats and weapons. On top of this, Jingcho with Constellations can also increase Yelan's damage by reducing Hydra resistance. Double Hydra teams with a good on-field unit, whether that's a pyro damage dealer or a driver like Nahida or Sucrose, with a peak of single target damage for a while. Yelan on these teams is offensively stronger than Jingcho while also buffing your on-field unit, so what happens when you can swap out Jingcho for another Yelan that also happens to give a stronger buff, and also does more damage than Jingcho? Well, you get the new double Hydra core, which has brought talent damage to new heights. Furina and Yelan even have enough damage by themselves to pass DPS checks. The only flaw you can find in this core is the demand for a healer, but that is very easily circumvented by the plethora of healers we have, including staples like Bennett for your attack scaling carries, or someone like Jean. And then being able to use healing drivers like Kokomi, Charlotte, Noelle, Hell, Chi-Chi to meet your healing needs. With the fact that this core works with so many units, 4.0 bringing more characters that will most likely work with Furina and by extension Yelan, and Furina already being a top tier character in her own right, I can only see this duo getting better as time goes on. The reason why I have this above the other cores is due mostly to applicability. If you look at the Nilou and Nahida core, you're still limited to a small amount of the roster, despite its strength and flexibility. Both the carry cores also leave little room for you to flex in an on-field unit, and the Bennett and Kazuha core only really works for attack scalers. The double Hydra core on the other hand needs a character to do normal attacks, and you also need a healer, both requirements which are the easiest to meet on this list. As most teams are going to be using a healer regardless, and if you desperately need an on-field unit, you could also just use Yelan as an on-fielder, as she gets buffed by her A4, and I'm not kidding, on-field Yelan teams are insanely good too, even at C0. So with all this in mind, I think the new double Hydra core is by far is dick riding, but I do think it is clearly the strongest duo in the game currently, while still having a decent room to grow with the more healers we get. And if Yelan is able to get a 4-star build that is good for her that isn't Fav. And that closes out my list. If you think I missed some characters, I'd recommend holding your horses and waiting for my trio list that will be releasing next week. And with that, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your own list, as I'd love to hear and respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.